I went forward in an evangelistic meeting when I was 13 because all the other boys did. And I wasn't saved. And I didn't get saved until the spring of my sophomore school year. During that time, I got into a lot of sin. A lot of sin. Then I started the journey that should have been 3 or 4 years earlier.
So it was that time between when you went forward, you had that space of time you call sin.
Yeah.
And then what happened? I mean, what made the difference?
We had an evangelist come to the Iowa Mennonite School, which was a high school there 3 miles east of me, Mennonite. And an evangelist came, and I was convicted, and I made a commitment.
How then did you come to really begin to what I would call obey the Lord? What was the thing that really transitioned for you?
Take my hand, dear. I started dating her, and we were both Christians, but in about 2 months' time, the Spirit had so much convicted me because of her life that I told my pastor, told her parents, told my parents everything I'd done, and we started over from scratch. I told Velma she didn't need to continue to date me.
Explain.
How's that? You mean?
Did you just you said you didn't need to date you anymore? Did you ask her a question?
No, I was saying that because if I was her, I wouldn't have done it to go with me.
Oh, okay, all right, I got you now. Well, so then, how long before you guys married? I mean, was there?
Okay, this was 1950.
No.
We graduated in 1950, so where would I be? About 48 maybe for a sophomore. I was a little older than the rest of the class.
Junior year, Dean, we started dating.
What did I say, sophomore? Junior.
Junior year.
And yeah. The Lord first and Velma second on decisions that have changed my entire life.
And so, you guys married?
Yes, 1950.
Okay.
December 28th.
And then what happened? Did you begin your career then, or
Yes,
looking for a career?
my father had been in custom work for years agriculturally, and he purchased a couple dozers, and I learned to operate one Fridays and Saturdays after school and whatnot. And so I knew how to operate well enough that I could be an operator. So as soon as we got married, December 28th of 1950, I went to work for my dad. Now, I'd worked for him all through, did lots of things, but he didn't pay me for it, and I didn't need the money. He'd give me whatever money I needed and give me a car to date, and I found the best girl in the world.
Did she feel like she found the best date in the world?
You ask her.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
So what would you say was the thing that really took hold of your life such that you decided you wanted Jesus more than anything else? Was there something, one event?
No.
It was just those revival meetings.
I had just been contrary to the Lord until that one time that he got a hold of me. And during that time, I had been in a trencher accident that I should have been killed, but the neighbor up the hill, well, about 3/4 of a mile away, just an old hermit kinda, had put tile in by hand, and he heard they're putting tile in with a machine. So he walked that down. He was over 80. He walked that down there and was standing right across from my dad, My dad was on the front left of the tiling machine, and he was on the right front, and I was laying the tile back into the, and it was really dry, and the dirt was rolling in pretty fast. These were the old clay tile, about a foot long, you know. Anyway, I was leaned over into the crummer box and laying it just as quick as I possibly could to keep that dirt from rolling in, and I have to. So my dad hit a clay spot, and the engine slowed down, and he threw the clutch, and I think he right then threw the transmission out for the tracks. So it could roll freely, so he snapped the clutch in again, and it rolled back enough that a bucket about this wide and about this long caught me right on the legs, put my head and my legs right together, and broke my ankle and scraped and the motor slowed down again. And he was just ready to snap it in again, the clutch in. If it would, that would have cut me right in two. And this man, my neighbor, walked down there and got him at the right place where he could signal to my dad. The Lord saved my life. Probably 30 seconds time. That was the epitome of stupid. Why wouldn't I catch on that there's someone in command over my life that I don't know, but I didn't. So it took a while longer, and Velma played a big part in it because of her life.
What did you see in her that impacted you the most?
I don't really know. It was just everything about her. The first time I seen her, that I decided I was going to try and date her if I could, was at a funeral. The Mennonites would set the men on the left and the men on the right and the women on the left, and this church was pretty good sized. I'd come out the man's side. I was at the funeral and she was at the funeral, and there was a water pump out in front of the church out on the walk, and this pretty girl walked over there with such a purposeful walk. I decided I was going to find out who that was and date her. Let me clarify a couple of things that were going for us. My father was in custom work. That means agricultural, disking, plowing, shellers, balers, trenchers now, and dozers. And her father was in the same type of business, more just balers and that type, and running. So we came from a background of you get started as soon as you can and work to dark. And she did too. So there's a real good deal, because if you want an 8-hour day, it don't fit in custom work. And so we had those two backgrounds that helped us to be compatible in the work times. And we came from similar theological background. At that time, the Mennonite church was much different than what it is today. So I'm hesitating on what to say next for sure. Okay. So I went to work for my father, and she became my wife, and I started operating, and I did that for 12 years for my father. And during that 12 years, we worked together in Iowa, and then after that, then the Lord called us down here.
Tell that story.
Huh?
Tell the story of how you came from Iowa.
Yeah.
Velma and I had just purchased an 80-acre farm for my great aunt, and it was really run down, and it was about 3 or 4 miles away from where we lived, and it wasn't modern or anything, and so we were living in my father's old house. So we purchased it, and we started fixing it up and put water in it and whatnot, a lot of things.
Bathroom.
Yeah, and my other cousin, one of my cousins, rented it then to farm because I was busy with the dozer, and so it wasn't, you know, I wouldn't have tried to farm because I wouldn't be a farmer anyway. But anyway, the community. There's a big Mennonite community in southeast Iowa: Wellman, Kelowna, Washington, Parnell, and they had a evangelist. I think it was Dr. Hammer. I think it was Brother Hammer, and he came in, and they had this big
Hammer.
Yeah, had this big revival, tent revival down in Kelowna, and Velma and I went. Why don't you tell the rest of it?
Well, our daughter Sandra there was about 3 months old, and one evening the evangelist asked if there was anybody in the audience that felt like the Lord had another place for them than serving him right here. And I looked at Dean, and he looked at me, and we both smiled. And I handed Sandra to my sister that was sitting beside me, and we went forward that night. And we told the Lord if he wanted us somewhere else in this large Mennonite Christian community, he would have to show us. And so we put the place in, and we talked to our pastor about it, and he said, now if you want to put it out for a fleece, don't put it out with any realtor, don't advertise it, it's just by word of mouth. Well, there were 3 farms right around us, and they were all nice, a lot nicer farms than ours. And they had their farms for sale for 2 years, and not a one of them had a bid offer, looker. And they said, they just kind of laughed at us, said, you'll never sell your farm. We've had ours for sale for 2 years. None of us has had a farm. You're not going to sell your farm. And Dean said, well, if he wants us somewhere else in here in Iowa, we'll sell it. And they kind of laughed about it because I think they thought we were young and immature.
Yeah, I'm sure they thought that.
And so we just told the Lord if he wants us in Missouri, he'd have to sell our farm. We weren't very smart, but we knew we could not move to Missouri and buy and pay for a farm, and we bought in Iowa. We knew that. So we told him, if you want us in Missouri, then you will. Well, first before that, his cousin that was a preacher down here came and visited, and Dean had told him about.
But we had been down here to Evening Shade
Yeah.
a number of times to help in the Bible school and stuff like that. So we knew the territory, we knew what we were thinking about, and we weren't asked to come as a preacher or anything, just a support couple.
He just he had come and asked us to come down here to help him as a lay couple, and and so anyway, Dean and I can't remember how long it was, but it wasn't all that long, and a man from his church, West Junior Mennonite Church that he was brought up in, knocked at our door about 9 o'clock one Saturday evening and said, Dean, I heard your farm's for sale. And we talked about it, and in 30 minutes it was sold, and neither Dean and I can remember what we got for it, how we paid for it. He wanted to know what we wanted for it and how we wanted him to pay for it, and so on and so forth. And when it was all done, he said, by the way, Dean, why are you selling your farm? So Dean told him, and he said, oh, your father's going to be angry at me for buying it because you're helping him run dozer. You know, and Dean said, no, my folks know all about it. They know this is, they know this, so no, he won't be angry. And so
And so once you're down here, what transpired? How did you work in the church?
Well, we knew we came to support this church plant, okay? So whatever needed to be done that we could do, I taught a youth class. I don't know, did you?
I taught the little
Yeah.
class for years.
And
25 years I did.
so when Bible school started in the summer, why, she was
Superintendent
And-
and the high school class.
yeah, and then
Years.
so and then Sunday. This is a peculiar situation for a church. The natives around here that came to church came in the evening service because they probably were doing chores in the morning. And instead of the natives coming for morning church, we picked up children all over here for Sunday school. So you had two different crowds actually.
In
And
the evening we had from a different crowd than in the morning.
yeah, right.
So have you had any of those kids come back as adults and talk to you about what impact?
Absolutely.
Can you tell us maybe one or two?
I remember a young man, very rebellious and very unhappy. His parents had moved from Buffalo and joined our church, and he was a rebel. And so the church there was going to excommunicate his family if they didn't kick him out. So they also allowed their excommunicated members to find a church before they banned them. Sean, you know what I'm talking about? Okay. So Alfie was really cynical and he was really a hurt boy. And I didn't, we taught youth class for probably 50 years, but I didn't realize how it had impacted him. But I talked to him a few years back and then just recently, and he said some of the things that I taught have made a big impact on his life.
He said he's never forgotten.
And how did you find your home when you came from Iowa?
I'll let her tell that.
Well, I said my only qualifications was I wanted a house that had 3 bedrooms, a boy's room, a girl's room, and our bedroom. And so the man showed us all day Saturday. He took us from place to place to place to place. There wasn't any house that had 3 bedrooms. There were some houses that had 2 bedrooms, but there wasn't any house, he showed us, that any bedroom was big enough for 2 beds. And I said I didn't care if we didn't have running water in the bathroom, but that I wanted. And so late in the afternoon, he said he didn't have any more places to show us. And so Dean and I just thought, well, what we'll probably do is come down and we'll just buy a trailer house and then add on to it and keep adding on to it. That's what we would do, because there weren't any houses big enough for them. And so Dean and Maynard went in town in Warsaw. And
Saturday morning then, we were going to have a picnic that evening.
Saturday morning is when
We went to Warsaw,
Warsaw.
I think.
Well, anyway, however, they went to Warsaw, and this realtor saw him on the street, and they came out.
As
and
we
said,
were walking along.
I thought of a place last night. I don't know why I didn't think of it yesterday to tell you about it. He said, it just might suit your wife's criteria. So we come out here, and oh my. If any of you know what Peter Tumbledown places look like, it was a Peter Tumbledown place. It was this room here. It's a 15 by 15, and there's a room beside it. It's a 15 by 12, and there's rooms upstairs, 15 by 12 and a 15 by 15. And this, where the kitchen is, was just like a barn, siding. And at the other end, it was a little better, and it was the kitchen part.
For that family.
But a lot of the windows were broke out, the roof was in bad shape, and the foundation was bad. And, but all I could see was these 3 bedrooms. And so he sold this place to us. Oh, and it was just growing up in weeds, grass. There was a fence all around the house, and there was a trash pile. Now it was not barbed wire, it was woven wire. And there was trash on both sides, most of it beer cans, on the front and in the back. And there was an old barn across where the shops are, and it was falling down, and the fences, well, they weren't fences. They were just torn down fences. And but I saw what we could do with it. And so we bought this for $5,000.
100 acres more or less.
And-
Almost all of it was full timberland, though.
And so, we had Maynard be the carpenter. We put in a concrete foundation and put in a new roof, and we put in we insulated the house, and we put new siding on, we put new windows in, and we had to put some new floor in the old part, and if we didn't, I don't know how the Lord gave us Ellen Dean and Leon. They were 8 and 9 when we moved down here. They were our oldest, and Ellen Dean could not stand that trash pile. He said he wanted to move it. They had gotten a big red wagon from his parents for Christmas that year. I could not begin to tell you how many loads they hauled down to the trench line
Yeah.
behind the barn.
But
Dean took sorry for him, and he helped him. And then they wanted a yard. And I said, oh, well, we moved down here in January. And I said, Ellen Dean, we don't have money for a lawnmower. We don't have money to buy a lawnmower. And he said, well, if Leon and I have enough money in our piggy banks, can we buy a lawnmower? Well, I no more thought they had money in their piggy banks to buy a lawnmower than Man the Moon.
well, that wasn't a rider.
No, it wasn't a rider, but it was a engine one, but they had to push it. And so here they come down next morning, and they brought the piggy banks, and they dumped them out, and they had already counted it. Yeah, they had more than enough to buy. And so
She'd penned herself in, hadn't she?
So anyway, they started cleaning up the yard, pick up rocks, pick up rocks, pick up rocks. And Dean helped him, and when they come home in the evenings, he helped him a lot. Finally they got it sowed, and this grass sowed. They went to use the mower the first time, and the mower was too high. Neither one of them could put their hands up here and push it. So one was on this handle, one was on, you know how they were.
And then down on the side.
So anyway, we really fixed the place up. It didn't look like the same place. And
So-
the next year, that same fellow came to us and wanted to sell us another
40 acres up here for $1,000 an acre.
And he said, I'll never know why I sold that place to you for $5,000. But also, Dean did a lot of clearing, because the people down here thought the land was not worth clearing. And so nobody wanted to clear. So he cleared land and sowed grass,
Built ponds.
and bought some cattle, and their cows looked terrible when we moved down here. They were so skinny, and their hip bones stuck up, you know, they looked like deformed animals of some kind. So that's how he got into the dozer business. They saw the land was worth, some of it was worth clearing, and did a lot of clearing.
I worked the first year and a half for two Church of Christ ministers at Lincoln. They had heavy equipment that was cutting timber down the boot hill.
Push that in your nose again.
And so after I got done overhauling their equipment, and they moved it back down there. They wanted me to go with them, and I said no. I said I didn't move down here to just be away from home. And so by the time we'd finished with the heavy equipment, they started buying trucks. They ended up with 10 over-the-road new tractors and grain trailers. And so I was the maintenance man. So when it all came down, they were the kind that preached on Sunday morning and kind of worked in the afternoon. And I knew kind of what would happen, especially with the trucks. There's always one needing something, or 2 or 3 of them. So I decided the only way I could keep from working on Sunday is to work till 12 o'clock Saturday night, go back to work at 12 o'clock Monday morning. That way they couldn't ask me to work on the afternoon of Sunday. I think that, I think that's what kept them from being able to coerce me. So then at a year and a half, a young man from Windsor and I bought an old dozer and started in the dozer business that January of '63. And I continued to mechanic for another 6 months, and he was running the dozer, and I'd help teach him some things and whatnot. So when I seen that it wasn't going to work that way, I quit my job on the maintenance, and we double shifted the tractor.
What kind of dozer was it?
D7. Yeah.
Always been Caterpillar?
We had one HD20 Alice. That's a big tractor, Anyway, what helped us a lot, this is unique, I think. There was a really windjammer of a big wheeler that was always at the sale barn. And we did some contract work for him on clearing, and he wouldn't brag on us, but he'd sure tell around in the auction that we were doing a good job. So he did more to advertise for us than anybody could have, or what a paper ad wouldn't have done us any good. So, and probably one of the things that I have to attribute to our success in the dozer business, my dad was one that wanted you to do the job right the first time instead of after the second time. And so I was pretty much of a perfectionist when it came to operating a dozer. So we contracted 40 acres, and our competitor contracted another 40 acres right beside us. He double shifted his tractor, and Buddy, my partner, just worked normal days, and he finished quicker than what we did. And so one of the things I think that made a difference, we had purchased a brush rake that we would put on after we had laid the trees down by riding them down. Then we would go sideways with a brush rake and clean them up, and it would get a lot of the sticks and trash and stuff. So, and we tried to fill the holes so it would be nice and smooth, and he liked that. He didn't tell us that, but he told everybody else that.
Hold on 1 second.
Okay. Am I taking too much time?
No, we're fine. All right. Okay. So, obviously, you were not a minister in the sense that you were working in the church. But,
Not as a minister, no, but as support help.
right. So your work was in the community and
Yeah,
working
yeah.
with the people and
Yeah. I had an opportunity to learn to know a lot of people in custom work like that. I worked for dozens and dozens of different farmers.
so were you able to lead people to the Lord
yeah.
through? Can you tell me?
Occasionally,
Can you tell me of one that really stands out in your mind?
yeah. There was a man that had a garage over here on the old highway, and he and his wife were divorced, and he had some live-in, and then he got cancer. But it happened to be that his name was Weaver, just like Velma's. And so about a year after we moved down here, well, I was still working up on some of the trucks at night up there, I guess, in Lincoln. But I would come back down. He had cancer, and I got acquainted with his wife because she was a waitress at the truck stop where I ate at night. And then I found out she'd left her other husband and came back and took care of her Lyle while he was down with cancer, and she'd take him to cancer hospital in Columbia during the day and work nights. And so Velma and I were talking about it. So you take over from there.
Well, he would stop on his way home it didn't matter if it was 9 or 10 o'clock, and stop in and talk to Lyle because he came right by his place, and he was bedfast, and Dean just was in his dirty, greasy clothes, and he loved that. And so Dean visited with about that for a while, but then he asked him about the Lord, and anyway, he led him to the Lord before he died. And they had 6 children, and the oldest of them was married, and the 4 younger ones, we kept a lot. And and then he died, and 3 weeks after his funeral, Marge, his wife, was up in the hospital with the second oldest boy, and the 4 younger ones were all here. At about 2 o'clock in the morning, the sheriff came out here and wanted to know if the Weaver children were here, and we said yes. And they said, well, that was good. Their house was on fire, and it was so they couldn't get in, and they knew that Marge had worked at nights, and they couldn't get in the house, and they knew that we had helped them. And so anyhow, it was our job the next morning, because she had stayed all night with her son. So we went the next morning and to tell her about it. So when
In Kansas City.
she wants to know, she said, did I send enough clothes over for him? She said, if I didn't send enough clothes, why go over and they've got plenty more clothes over at the house, and just go over and get some more. She said, I didn't know how many to send, and she wanted to know how they were doing, and she was just talking, and it was the hardest thing for Dean to tell her what we came for. And so, make a long story short, Dean shared it in the community, and we rode home to Iowa to our families, and they told it in their churches, and the churches in Iowa sent an amazing amount of money down to rebuild a house. And churches and people down here, carpenters came and helped, and Marge just couldn't believe that the people would do that.
He's really asking you about a couple of testimonies with the people, I think.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
But let's start over. Go ahead and
Okay.
start again.
We had heard about the Gospel Echoes teams, and there was a team that went in to prisons and sang, and they gave they had a message, and they gave an invitation, and there were lots of prison boys that gave their hearts to the Lord, and we had read about it and heard about it, and so we had been going to different churches and telling them about the Gospel Echoes. We'd never seen the team or heard a team, and raising money for them, the church would usually take an offering for them. And here, then one evening, we found out that next Sunday there was going to be one in the Versailles area, so we went up to hear them, and we were just really excited about it. And so we contacted the Algoa prison, and I told them we were interested in being some volunteers. So they set us up for volunteers. We went once a month on a Sunday. No. We went
On a Thursday.
Huh?
Thursday.
Yeah, we went on a Thursday, that's right. We went on a Thursday and had services. And then, and there were several carloads of us that went at first from Evening Shade. I think Joe was one of them that went with us, didn't you?
No, I started later than that.
Later than that?
Before I came in.
Yeah.
And anyway, it finally dwindled down until it was just Dean and I. And we went on Thursday evening, and then we would ask them.
Well,
We were coming then on the next Sunday at noon. We would be there to visit with any of them that wanted to visit with us. And so Sunday afternoons we were just busy visiting with the fellows that had signed their names for us, and then that's how we started going to Algoa, and yeah, a lot of lives have been changed. They have told us how a lot of lives have been changed, and just not too long ago, a man and his wife came down here. They have a number of times, and visited us, and have thanked us many times for what the Lord did for him in Algoa. Now, a lot of the men don't live close to here, you know, and so then for the Gospel Echoes, they have a Bible study ministry, and they have graders, and so we have about 4 graders in Missouri, and their daughter's one of them, and I was I don't know what I was. Coordinator for all these. The boys from the prison, they send their lessons to, I signed this prison to this grader, and you know, I had to divide them up kind of. And then a year or two ago, I just felt like, you know, I was almost 89, and I mean 87, and I am now, but then, and I just thought somebody needs to take my place, but I didn't know how to ask anybody, because to me, prison work isn't something that you just want to go out and ask any Joe and Blow. It has to be somebody that has a heart for prison people. And some people just don't have any time for prison people because they think they deserve being in prison, and da-da-da-da. And so we were at a Christmas program at Christmas time, the churches in the area bake cookies, the Mennonite churches, and it's 1,000 dozen they have to make, and we put 6 cookies in a little bag, a plastic bag, and a greeting card, and a little date book, and then we get a group of people, about 30, to go with us, and they sing, and they pass them out, and Dean and I and Joe and whoever.
Generally the chaplain.
Shake hands with each one of them. And
they would leave them out one dorm at a time to come past where the cookies were,
and we see more tears picking up these cookies, and they just thank us. They really appreciate it.
When did you start going to prison?
Prison work?
Yeah.
About 73 or 4, I think.
Oh, do you know when it was?
We've been going 18 years in 1990. We can back up from that. When I started in 1990 with you guys, you'd been going 18 years.
So he's
So that
72.
would be
What would that be?
72.
72.
So that's 48 years.
And then just this last, was it last Christmas? Yes. Why,
No, it was 2 Christmases ago.
not two, just a Christmas ago.
You're talking about
Well, anyway,
Warren and
Warren and,
Heather.
anyway, Warren and
2 or 3
Heather.
years.
2 years, yeah.
2 years.
Yeah.
After we had passed out the cookies and we were visiting, and this young fellow came up to me and he said, Velma, how can we get involved in prison work here? And the chaplain was standing right beside you. I said, right here's the chaplain, you talk to him. Now, was that not an answer to prayer? Him and his wife have been doing a great job. And now he is, he's really assistant chaplain.
Well, he'd take it 1 day a month.
Yeah, he takes the place of the chaplain one weekend out of a month to give
Yeah.
him a chance.
Very good. Wow. So, what would you say your legacy in the community would be? I know that's hard for you to say, and maybe it will take somebody like Joe.
Somebody else needs to say that, I think.
They are the impersonation of Jesus' love.
They are the impersonation of Jesus' love. Okay. What would you like for your legacy to be?
Okay, let me just tell you something. I answer the phone, and a lot of times it's for somebody wants dozer work done, and they will tell me, oh, Dean did dozer work for me such and such a time. He did such a good job, and they want him to come back. But what I think is better than that, Dean and Ellen, our son now, does the very same thing. Don't ask me how they always get on the conversation of the Lord, but they do. And
Not
they're-
always, dear.
Well, I didn't say always. I said many times they do. And they have led people to the Lord that way. And there are so many people that have come from the community to see Dean now that they know he's in a hospital bed that they did work for. I've never met him, heard the names, but I would know him from Adam. And so their honesty, their truthfulness, their work that Ellen Dean, our oldest son, and him have done has been a real testimony. There's been a lot of them that have called Elwyn since Dean's retired, have called Elwyn and want to know about the Lord, and some of them, and when they die, they want Elwyn to be their teacher. She said, Velma, when you get old enough to date, I want you to watch how your boyfriend talks about his siblings, whether they're younger or older, how they talk about their mother, how they talk about their father, how they treat them, how they talk about their friends. However they talk to all those people is the way that they will treat you. And that's what made me realize real soon after Dean and I were dating, even though I was young. He's the oldest of 3, and he had a brother that was 8 years old younger and a sister that was
4.
5 years younger. And he talked on our dates on Sunday night. So often he would say what his kid brother did that week that was so funny, and his kid brother had a double first cousin that they lived close together, and they did so many funny things. and about his sister learning to cook, and he'd tell me what she cooked, and sometimes he'd say, and it was as good as it was good as Mama baked, and sometimes he'd say it wasn't quite as good as Mama's baking, but it was good anyway. And he'd talk about his dad. He talked about his grandma and his grandpa and his friends. I never heard him say anything bad about anybody. So I didn't date him very many months, even though I was young, that I thought if he'd ever asked me to marry him, I would say yes.
She never told that to me till after we were married. But that's all right.
So, and part of the reason I feel like Dean and I had a good marriage is I wasn't on my own when I left. I was 17 and a half when I got married. And, you know, I worked for my folks, and I was obedient to my folks. He was working for his father. He was obedient to them. Neither one of us made our own, you know, we were under our parents' roof. And so when we got together, we did it together. He didn't make a decision and tell me that we're going to do this, or I didn't, you know. And a lot of times he would come home from work and he would say, you know, who I had on my mind and prayed for today. And I said, who? And he would say, it was the very same person the Lord laid on my heart to pray for that day. And sometimes he would say, the Lord laid on my heart that we need to send the next amount of dollars to such and such a missionary. It was the same person that I thought, I wish we would send him some money. And this happened time and time again. So we really had nothing. We never argued. We just never have.
So I'd like to hear you, first of all, Dean. Who is Jesus Christ to you? And to start out by saying Jesus Christ is.
Jesus Christ is the only way for salvation. And I learned that, of course, in Sunday school classes from the time I was little. And we had a Bible class and a missions class in our high school. So after my sophomore year, I had decided I wanted to walk with Jesus, and that was helped in educating me in the Bible and things like that.
And you, Velma?
Well, we had about a house fire when I was 9 years old, and my sister that's 4 years older than me got trapped in it, and we almost lost her. In fact, the doctors gave up on her. And I loved her, and I was so scared. And we had, in the daytime, I had to wake her up every 30 minutes to wake her up. The doctor said she'll go into a coma and she won't come out. So I did that in the daytime, and my parents did it at night.
They kept some kind of massage.
Well, yeah, I was supposed to talk to her and ask her some things, you know, questions, and see if she answered them right. And I sat there and I thought, if I was Virginia and I died, I'd never ask Jesus into my heart. And so that made me examine myself. Then I told Mama that I wanted Jesus to come into my heart, because if I died, I wouldn't go to be with Jesus, because I'd never ask him in my heart.
So what would you say is the thing that impacted you the most in terms of your relationship with the Lord? Was there someone?
Yeah, Velma.
Okay.
Well,
She was.
I'm the youngest of 8, and I at one time had 3 of my siblings were in the mission field, and my oldest sister had worked in a children's home in Kansas City several years before she was married, and she had a real heart for children that didn't have parents. And the two sisters, Goldie and Virginia, that was 4 and 6 years older than I, they taught school in parochial schools. And they had a heart for children. They had a real heart for children. So it was really, my older siblings, I always said, is what made me know that Christ was important.
What about you, Dean? What would you say was the most impactful person or thing that happened to you in terms of your growth and relationship to the Lord?
It goes back to what I said. She influenced me more than anyone else except Christ. And so consequently, that was not all at once. That was over a lifetime. And it's been a good journey.
What would you say would be the miracle that you saw in your life? Was there one in particular, maybe a salvation, but did you see a miracle?
You mean about me?
True. Well, that you saw God do.
Oh, yeah.
In you, or whether you saw happen in someone else. How would you describe that, and what role did you play in it, if any?
Tell about Marge Weaver.
Mrs. Weaver, after the house burned and they had gotten established in the new one that the community built, Velma had been doing the washing for her. So we'd go over, take the washing back, and each time we'd say, now we're going to talk to Marge about the Lord, and we'd never do it. And we were really feeling pretty guilty about it. One Saturday night, she came and sat on that piano bench. She said, "You've got something I want. What is it?" Then her entire family, except the oldest son probably, and the second son wasn't living a Christian life right then. But anyway, yeah, the whole family became integrated with ours, and the church, joined the church and so on.
And so I said, "Oh, Marge, I just feel so bad. All the times we come over to your house, we thought we were going to talk to you about the Lord. And every time we'd come home and look at each other, and we hadn't said a thing about the Lord." And she said, "I tell you what, Velma, if you would have done it then, I'd have told you where the door was and I'd have meant it." And she laughed. She said, that's the way it would have been, because she wasn't ready. And that helped Dean and I to know that you can have a heart for somebody, but it's like one of the women that come to church. Dean knew her father, but anyway, he was. You tell him about when you.
Okay, there's a lady that's in our church now.
Talk a little louder.
She, in fact, she was a teenager at the time that I went by their road that I would have to follow, and I'd heard that her father was sick, and I just felt like the Lord wanted me to go over and see if I could encourage him. Got there and knocked, and just minutes before, he had asked his wife and daughter to get a hold of a pastor. And so I was able to lead him to the Lord there that morning. That probably is the most, that isn't all that big, but it was important.
It was to his soul. It was big to his soul.
Huh?
It was big to his soul.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Linda, it's Linda, isn't it? Linda has just thanked him so many Sundays at church. And what that did.
There's one other incident I'm going to tell you. This same family, after the husband died, I took the widow over down in the country in the boonies, and had iced really, really bad. I took her down to look at a burial plot for her husband. And I wondered whether we'd ever get out of there. It was really slick. I'll never forget that.
Joe, is there something?
Yeah, he needs to share.
You would like for them to talk about? Is there something?
No,
Okay.
I'm just honored to be here.
Okay. Okay.
They've been a big influence in my life. I'm just pleased to be here.
One of the things that was really amazing, the chaplain that we had that first years that we were there was a beautiful man. He just was so good. He played with he had polio, no, cancer, I guess.
No, it was polio.
And when he got well enough, he'd go back to playing basketball with him evenings and stuff. And so one day we were walking up to the ad building, and I said, "Is there something else we could do with those boys so I could get to know them better?" And he said, "Well, you could take a one-on-one with them." He said, "I'll pick out a few that I can't seem to get through to, and I'll give you the names. And next Sunday, which would have been about 3 days later, we got to visit with them one-to-one in the ad building there, wherever we were then. And it's really interesting. They would tell us things that they didn't tell anybody else in prison because they wouldn't be able to trust them. But they knew we weren't getting paid, and so they trusted us.
They couldn't believe that we would drive 100 miles up there to visit them that we didn't even know. And that's why, and when they would tell all things, a lot of times Dean was able to share some things that was just an automatic way to talk to them. They just opened the door.
There's one thing I might say. I always feel like I'm not evangelistic enough, but I wouldn't make a good door-to-door evangelist at all. I wouldn't feel comfortable. I need to be a friend to that person before I start sharing Christ. I think they deserve that. And I think that's been a principle that my son and I have used all these years.
So, in terms of your relationship with the Lord, looking back to talking to younger people, what would you say is your greatest regret? My greatest
regret is over the years we were pretty poor, and we worked hard and long, and I regret that I did that much material work when I came for support couple. So that's my biggest regret, I think.
Velma, what about you?
I don't know what my biggest regret would be, unless it would be probably that we didn't always get our letters written to them when we wrote letters. And then it come to a time they really didn't want us to write letters, didn't they?
Yeah.
For a number of years, we could write to the
Inmates.
And
that took a lot of time.
it took a lot of time. It did take a lot of time. And but it was just a good way that they would share, and then we could write back to them and share the Lord. Dean did a good job of that.
Anything you guys want to
Joe? Give him a little bit of history and just a little bit about the Gospel Echoes. We haven't talked a lot about them.
If you do want to say much, I'll need to get a camera on you and that kind of
I
thing.
don't have a lot to say. I don't know what you haven't covered, Dean. I thought it was good.
Yeah, I don't either.
I don't know. Joe is one of these fellows that he doesn't brag, and he's been just a
He's been a
tool of
good
the
job
Lord's.
for Dean and I.
Your daughter was saying that sometimes you would see a family on the road. They needed help. Can you share a little about that?
Oh, I don't know any specific one. Yeah, I used to kind of watch when I was mechanic, and why I got to see a lot of truckers that was broke down and people in cars, and I couldn't hardly go, while I was mechanic and only, I couldn't hardly go past somebody broke down. It just couldn't be. And so I remember one incident. It was an old Mack truck, and the pump went out, the diesel pump went out, and he was broke down on the side of the road, and the fellows I was working for let me off, so I stopped and took the pump off, and we sent it to where it needed to be, and he came and stayed with us until we got it back, and we put it on, and he went on his way. That probably is the most outstanding one on a repair job.
Very good. Anything you wanted to ask them they haven't covered?
Yeah, I wanted to hear the story about the house and the beer cans at
Oh,
the
yeah.
top of the fence on both sides. But not very many couples get to make it to 70 years together. That's incredible. So you were
It's miraculous.
I was 17 and a half. We were going to get married on my 18th birthday. That was June the 20th. That was a very, very busy time for Dean's father with the Dozers. And Dean was working for him, and it was a very busy time. And we knew it didn't please his father a whole lot. And we wanted to take a honeymoon. And his father didn't think honeymoons were necessary. My parents thought honeymoons were necessary. Of course, we agreed with my parents. And so we asked if we could get married the 20th of February, because his work wouldn't have started yet, you know. And I thought, well, his mother won't care, but I thought his father would think I'm too young. And so, anyway, I had, that was okay. It was okay with my folks. So I immediately sat down and wrote to every one of my siblings and told them that we were getting married at Christmas time.
Oh, February.
Huh?
Wasn't it February?
Oh yeah, February. We were getting married at February, the 20th, and I wanted them all to know so they could plan to come. And I got a letter right back from my sister that's 4 years older than I am. She wasn't married yet, but she was a school teacher. She said, I don't know why you and Dean didn't plan a Christmas wedding. It's been 7 years since all of us children have been home for Christmas. And so I read that letter to him. Our mail went in the afternoon at that time. And so that night at the supper table, my Papa was sitting on this end of the table, and I told him, I said, I got a letter from my sister Virginia. I got the best advice I've ever had in my life. And so I read it to him. And I looked at Papa and I said, Papa, what about it? Can Dean and I have a Christmas wedding? And he just smiled at me and he said, whatever your mother says. So I look over at this end of the table and I asked my mother, and she looks at me and she smiles and she said, Velma, it would be so nice to have all the children at home at Christmas. I said, Mama, you don't care if Dean and I get married at Christmas time? And she said, I would love it. I called Dean on the telephone and asked him if he was busy or had anything that night. I had something very important to talk to him. But at that time, you didn't talk to people on the telephone
Right.
if you didn't want everybody to know. So he came right up, and I told him. So he said, well, he'd come up the next night and see if his folks agreed with that. So he came, and I wasn't quite through washing the dishes. He got a tea towel and he was wiping dishes, and he was pretty quiet. It was up to me kind of to make the conversation. I thought, oh, I knew his mother wouldn't, but I bet his father objected. So we finish up the dishes, we walk in the living room, and I pull the light string on, and I said, your father objected, didn't he? And he just laughed and laughed. He said, no, he didn't. But he said, I told him I'm going to go up and make Velma believe that you didn't agree with it. And he said, well, I'll bet you a box of candy you can't get that done. And he got his box of candy. We had 3 weeks to get married. Very next day, I went and bought my dress material because I made my wedding dress and my wedding nightgown and my going away dress and
Her cake.
yeah, I made and decorated my own cake, and we decorated the nut cups, you know, and so we got it all done.
Where did you get married?
At our South English Liberty Mennonite Church. And
Yeah.
by the way, after we were married, we went up to Liberty Mennonite Church, the church that we went to, because that church was started just like Evening Shade was. It was started as a mission church, and it was just about the size as Evening Shade. And when we got married, he said, "My church doesn't need any more people."
I think there were about 350 members.
We could have driven 3 miles to this church, but we drove the 18 miles and helped in Liberty Church.